let me just state up front, I am, as I imagine most people who've followed this channel for at least a little while are aware, am a cisgendered heterosexual male. So do take most of what I'm about to say with a grain of salt. Granted, while my primary criticism of Supergirl Season 5 is directed at the writers and producers, nearly all, if not all of whom are heterosexual, cisgendered people themselves, and not at LGBTQ fans, I will be calling out a subset of LGBTQ fans, particularly those in the Supercore ship, meaning the romantic pairing of the title character Supergirl with Lena Luthor, right? Okay. I imagine most of you following this know what shipping means. You've probably seen my collection of various Star Trek playlists that I've made for Star Trek shippers over on a blog. And if you've seen my Voyager videos, you know that I once wrote a massive tome that basically was about the pairing of Seven of Nine with a character that she literally only had one scene with. But just a heads up. So, oh boy, Supergirl Season 5. There were some problems with Season 5. I do think I still liked it on the whole. The Crisis event was really cool, and of course, I just absolutely adore Mia Nall, Dreamer, played by Nicole Maines. I read the book about her, Becoming Nicole. It is very moving. I highly recommend it. There was a noticeable lack of her compared to last season, though. That was disappointing. But there is a criticism of the show this past season that I think is incredibly fair. The problem is, when I've gone and looked at these criticisms, particularly on Tumblr, which is, where a lot of these fandoms are active. I'm active on Tumblr, and, people make jokes about it, and some of them are valid, but a lot of them basically just come down to Millennial and Gen Z punching. The problem is these legitimate criticisms, particularly how incredibly toxic the friendship between Kara, Supergirl, and Lena is, kind of gets buried under a heap of fandom entitlement. And fandom entitlement is one of the worst aspects of toxic fandom. Now, I'm not talking about people who are upset that their ship isn't canon. That's gonna happen. I'm talking about people who go so far as to harass other people involved with the show, including writers or actors who play, quote-unquote romantic rivals to their one true pairing. Or people who want a character to be killed off for no reason other than they are a romantic rival to their one true pairing. And that's a bit much. I mean, it's like, okay, I don't particularly care that much for William, the character in question, the character that the toxic subset of Supercore shippers just want to die. But, I mean, killing him off just because they think that it'll mean that Kara and Lena will get to be together, that is not going to happen. And the toxic entitlement on behalf of the fan base can be really gross, especially since, as I said, they have some very valid criticisms about this past season. And that is where I'm going to start with here, before I get into the problem that is definitely the CW's fault, or at the very least, the people who work on Supergirl's fault. That point is that, yes, it is absolutely toxic, and, okay, I don't want this video to run too long, and I'm certainly not an expert on these things. I don't want to use psychiatric terms incorrectly, but basically, yeah, there is a degree of abuse there that the show, I think, somewhat unintentionally normalizes, particularly the scene in the season finale when Lena tells Kara, it's like, you can scream at me if you want to, which is just like, that is pretty much literally inviting abuse, because screaming in her face was literally what her incredibly abusive, at least emotionally, brother, Lex Luthor, did towards the end of the previous episode. And honestly, throughout this past season, both characters have made some really boneheaded decisions with regards to their relationship that the writers have not handled well at all. And this is where I'm going to get into my criticism of them rather than of the fandom. Because, fandom entitlement is certainly a thing, as I've been talking about. And fandom entitlement will kind of always exist where you have a fandom for any TV show, particularly one that's fairly popular like this one. But it didn't have to be this bad. And the reason it is this bad is the original sin here of queerbaiting. I 100% believe, I can't read minds, so I can't prove it, but I 100% believe that the producers and writers of Supergirl were intentionally provoking that section of the fan base that believed that Supergirl and Lena Luthor should be a couple. What I think happened is that originally they'd intended for them to be like Clark and Lex in the Superman comics, as rivals. I think it was either her first or second episode on the show, Katie McGrath, who plays Lena Luthor, had that scene with her, after Kara leaves and she's with the chessboard. I think the original intent was for them to be rivals, probably by the end of that season. But then the writers and the casting directors and everyone else involved, they were just completely blindsided, not just by how much chemistry Melissa Benoist and Katie McGrath had, but how the fan base would receive them. And here's the thing, shippers are going to ship. That's just how it is. And there's nothing wrong with that. I feel like I shouldn't have to repeat it, but I'm going to anyway. Again, look at all those various fan mixes I've made for other Trekkies for their ships with no judgment on my part. I wrote A Fire of Devotion. I subscribe to the Shipper's Guide to the Galaxy YouTube channel, which, hasn't been putting much content out lately, but, still. So, in case you're not clear what the term queerbaiting means, I've actually included a link to a really good video about it by YouTuber Sarah Zed. That's in there. Also, I would recommend watching the video by the channel Trexpertise about toxic fandoms. While the primary focus of Trexpertise is Star Trek, of course, which is how I discovered it, because, hyper Trekkie. But it really does cover some of the terms that I've used here, like fandom entitlement, and what those mean. And this video is probably at risk of running a little long, as it is, at least by Rants vs. Zombies standards. So, whether intentionally or unintentionally, actually no, let me rephrase that. Whether through malice or ignorance, the writers and producers of Supergirl decided to basically string the Supercore shippers along. And that is what brought us to the worst aspects of Season 5, which is, as I talked about, which is how their friendship has basically become abusive. Particularly seeing as the friendship was on the outs for almost the entire season, how had they become enemies. Largely due to manipulation by Lex Luthor, because he's Lex Luthor, that's what he does. Ultimately, it didn't work. And not just because of the queerbaiting, but that is the big thing there. Because they decided to do this, because they decided to queerbait the audience, and that is what I believe happened, they missed the opportunity to actually have this rivalry and possible reconciliation. Maybe they'd planned for the two of them to reconcile after becoming enemies anyway. That was always the plan, that they just extended it. But because they chose to queerbait the audience for several seasons, the window where this whole thing of them falling out and becoming enemies, it didn't work. And they honestly should have done one of two things. They should have just either not done it at all and just leaned in to the friendship between the two characters and accepted that, that they were going to be shipped and that some of the shippers would be unhappy if either character started dating a man. That's going to happen. Even on a show that has otherwise fairly good LGBTQ representation, which honestly makes the queerbaiting even kind of worse, because they did it when we know that they can do better, when you have characters like Alex and Nia Nall Dreamer, played by Nicole Main's total high point of, honestly, the last couple of seasons, and I'm going to be watching her vampire movie pretty soon, called Bit. It's described as an intersectional feminist vampire movie, and some of the comments I saw under the trailer were like angry man baby stuff, and so far, watching a movie mainly because it made the man babies angry has worked out for me. I probably would not have seen Mad Max Fury Road otherwise, loved it. Might not have seen Birds of Prey, loved it. But I got really sidetracked there. So as I was saying, two options. Either don't do it at all, or do it as originally planned during the first season that Katie McGrath was on the show. And they didn't do either of them, and honestly, I don't think they can entirely come back from this. I think they can mitigate the damage. I think they can stop the bleed off of some of the viewers they had from the past season. But I think at the end of the day, the show will not get back to the ratings it had at its peak. And it probably won't go the full 8 seasons like Arrow did. It might get next season, season 6 might end up being the last one. Maybe they'll get a season 7, which I would be okay with that as long as it has a satisfying ending, because, I mean, I do like this show. I mean, that might not come across in this video, but I really do like this show. When it is good, it is really good. It's just that when they screw up, it kind of hits you in the face like a frickin' anvil being thrown at you by the Incredible Hulk. Yes, I know, different franchise, shut up. But, I mean, I think, let this be a lesson to you. You know, have your characters be straight, or gay, or bi, or pan, or whatever. Just don't tease the audience by suggesting they might be something else. I really hope that the next season of Supergirl really fixes what they can with regards to this. And I'm going to end this video on a vague enough suggestion that I couldn't sue them even if I wanted to if they went ahead with it, especially since it's something that the franchise has done before. The first big crossover event happened not too long after Flashpoint, and the writers of The Flash showed that they had been paying attention to the fandom reaction to this by having a fair chunk of the technically first part, although technically second part. Invasion was a little bit of a mess. It basically started at the post-credit sequence of an episode of Supergirl and then everything. The point is, they had, in that episode, the Flash episode of the crossover, a thing that YouTuber Nash brilliantly described as Barry shaming, where you had other characters calling Barry out on his fuck-ups, and Barry learning from those fuck-ups. I think next season, we gotta have something like that happen in Supergirl, and, you know, primarily for Kara, but I think Lena needs a bit of a dressing down, too. Metaphorically speaking, I should add that, because Katie McGrath is fairly attractive. But moving on, I don't know how they'll do it. I have some ideas, but I can't really say them, because if somebody from the CW happens to hear this episode, not bloody likely, they wouldn't be able to use it for legal reasons. But the concept of, you know, just having someone, a secondary character from the show, a special guest star, maybe even someone crossing over from one of the other shows, whatever, just giving Kara Danvers and Lena Luthor just a serious what the hell speech, just calling them out on all the things that the fandom has valid complaints about, and they are out there, even if it is buried under a pile of fandom entitlement, which sucks. You know, address those concerns. It's not going to fix everything, but it will show that the people who make the show care. And I think that by itself would be a major positive for Supergirl. I honestly think that. Feel free to disagree, leave something in the comments, let me know how much I'm talking out of my ass. I certainly believe I've used the terms like queerbaiting and fandom entitlement correctly, but yeah, sorry this video is a bit of a jumble. I've had the idea of doing this video for a couple of weeks, but I kept coming up with excuses not to do it. Just doing this was really the only way to get it out of my head so that I could have room in there for other stuff. So, including, hopefully, future episodes of Rants vs. Zombies, because holy crap was it a long gap between the last one and this one. Anyway, that was my opinion, and, you know, hey, if worse comes to worse and Supergirl ends up shooting itself in the foot, maybe we could get Nia Nall over on Legends of Tomorrow, or have her join Team Flash or anything. You know, just so long as I get to keep the just almost supernaturally adorable Nicole Maines on my television. Was it creepy that I said it like that?